Kia ora, and welcome to this reading of A Cluster of Lights. This is a brand new anthology, just hot off the press. It includes 52 writers from around the world, and it came out of a project that began in 2010. So it's really wonderful to see the writers in the room today who are going to share their works. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. This is the second reading of the day. We are National Flash Fiction Day New Zealand is sponsoring our Festival of Flash, which runs every year. It's an online sharing of books as well as new work. Some long-listed and short-listed readers are in the mix. Some panel discussions are happening. We have one later, 2 more panels later today, and then 4 next weekend. So there's a lot of really exciting things happening around the Festival of Flash, which takes place online in conjunction with New Zealand's National Flash Fiction Day. It's on June 22nd. So I hope everyone will tune into those things. Thank you to everyone who's joined us for this reading. We have a really wonderful set of readers from this book. I'm going to hold it up. Whoops, I never know which way to go. It's a brand new book, as I mentioned before, called A Cluster of Lights, and it includes 52 writers who basically the challenge was to take a piece of writing from a previous time, anywhere from 5 to 10 years ago, and then write a new piece of writing in response to that. John Wentworth Chapin and I edited the book together because we actually edited the project in 2010. We were the main editors on that project, and it was a really wonderful online community that formed around that challenge of writing every week for 1 year. So we went back and asked those people to respond to their writing from 2010 and 2011. And we also invited some more people outside of the project to join for the book's purposes for the anthology. And we're really excited about the people who turned out for that. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is tell you the list of readers who are going to be joining you and welcome them. Thanks again to everyone. And then we're just going to have each of them introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their writing, and then read a piece from the book. So with us today, we have Alex Rees-Abbott, who's tuning in from the UK, I think at a very late hour, perhaps. So welcome, Alex. We have Sheila Mannion, who's from Ireland, who lives in Christchurch, New Zealand. We have David Eggleton, who lives in Dunedin, New Zealand, and David has just finished his 3-year stint as New Zealand's Poet Laureate. So welcome, David. Wonderful to see you in this project as well. We have Andrew Stanchuk from the US, Tina Berry from the US, Rachel Smith from Christchurch, New Zealand, Nod Gosh, who also lives in Christchurch, Sam Rasnake from the US, who was also part of the original project. And I think I've known Sam for eons with online projects and many things that we've edited and worked on together. And it's really nice to see these people who were in the original project as well. And lastly, but certainly not least, Eric Kennedy, who's coming to us from New Zealand as well. Eric will be moderating a panel later this afternoon at 2 o'clock. So you can tune into that as well. I'll just give that a little note here. At any rate, thanks to everyone for being here. Without any further introduction then, I'd like to hand it over to Alex Rees-Abbott. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Michelle. Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Michelle, John, and Matt for putting this anthology together, and to all the writers. It feels like a real taonga, and I think it's just a really exciting concept. I'm very happy to join and be part of it. 2 pieces from me. I'm going to read the later one. My earlier work was called Antipodean Pepper Tree. Actually, it was the first flash fiction I ever wrote, and it was written for a postcard competition as a bet because I struggled to edit my own work. And so it was a joke with a friend of mine. I still struggle to edit my own work, but that's another story. It connects with my second piece, really through the pepper tree, but also exploring the here and there-ness of writing. Anyway, years passed. I went back to see the tree itself, and a couple of years later, a friend sent me a photo of a case moth from Australia. I'd only ever seen them in that pepper tree, and I started researching and found some more connections that I found exciting. And then I received an invitation from Michelle, so it seemed like it was meant to be. That's the story behind the story. So without further ado, Antipodean case moth. This morning, a photo from Tari flashed up on my phone, and my friend Maureen cocooned case moth sent me flying south again. 12,000 miles to New Zealand. 6 years old, in my back garden, observing the world from my pepper tree lair. The tree where I discovered a perfect cicada husk, a fragile sepia treasure, still clinging to the rough bark long after the owner had taken flight. Genus Mola, where I spied the case moth larva suspended from a branch, at first glance a dying bud. Snug in her fawn cocoon, her journeys elegantly woven, written in fragments of twigs and leaves that she'd harvested along the way. Matura elongata, I watched her extend her armored thorax from her papoose to weave a silken ladder, watched her dragging her home behind her, climbing, taking her camouflage where she could find it. Curiosity drew me too close, and she retreated, then sealed her case until the danger had passed. I watched, waited for her metamorphosis and flight. Now I know, the wingless female never leaves her larval case. A few years ago, I made a pilgrimage back to my leafy haven. While I'd been away, the new owner had subdivided our quarter acre and felled my giant pepper tree. For the convenience of a smooth concrete driveway, I left, taking my vivid milksap memories with me, strong-rooted, yet shaken by that long tombstone slab. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Morena. Can everybody hear me? I'm Sheila. I'm an Irish writer in Christchurch. I've been here for 10 years now, but only getting more Irish, really, in a way. My first piece, which is called Redemption Song, is actually one of the first things I've ever written. It was really nice to go back to that, actually, and realize that I like it still. And in fact, I guess it destroyed any illusion I might have had of progress, because I think it's actually better than the piece I wrote in response. But I guess that's that. It occurred to me that I'm still writing about the same stuff. That first piece was about connection, really, and hope and longing, really, and also grief. And I think I'm still writing about those things, and I think I probably always will write about those things. So yeah, it's the same old story. So I'll read the second piece, which is called Island Woman. It must have been cold when she went into the water. They found her body 3 weeks later. The currents carried her as she knew they would, far away. It's been years, and only now do we begin to speak of her. I still feel unentitled to the measure of my grief, being a cuckoo in that nest. That last weekend, we spoke of our mutual love of water and of our island nature, of the width and depth of the oceans and the seas and their never-ending possibilities. We spoke of the sense of renewal, of rebirth water brings, and then, contrary to this, of the improbability of true personal change. She said she had begun to think on absence as more beneficial than presence. In retrospect, I wish I had argued this point. She was saying goodbye to me then, but I'm glad that she felt that she could. I see her framed in the doorway as I left, smiling. Still I let her go. I waved. What else could I do? And now, though I wish she were still in the world, that she had stayed, and though I'm forever lonelier without her, I am comforted that she chose her death as she could not choose her life, that she sought and found the support of water. It eases me to think of her in the arms of the ocean, cradled in the deep, though it must have been cold when she went into the water.
Hmm. Kia ora. Good morning. Got to figure out how to get into the main screen here.
Actually, David, do you want to read a little bit later? And then we'll just have someone else read ahead of you?
Okay.
Let's move David to the end. And this happens in readings, and that way we'll get the technical glitches sorted.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, perfect. All right. We'll go on to, let's see who's following David. Andrew, you're next.
Hello, hello. Am I heard? Yes. I'm Andrew Stanchek. I'm originally from Slovakia, what was at one time Czechoslovakia and then is currently Slovakia. And that's relevant because both these stories, both the original 2010 story and the current one take place in the Tatra Mountains of Slovakia. At the moment, I'm coming to you not from the US as Michelle would have it, but from near Toronto in Canada, slightly west of Toronto in Canada. However, that's perfectly okay. I'm fine with that. So by way of introduction, as I started thinking about this, and I reread my piece from 2010, and I started thinking about it and about the current piece, I thought, well, back in 2010, yes, I was in my 50s, but I think I was filled with hope and enthusiasm and was expecting all kinds of wonderful positive things, and that is reflected in the piece itself from 2010. And then the piece which I wrote recently is piece of a man in his 60s who is I've in the meantime lost a great many loved ones and put on a great deal of weight, and there just seems to be a lot less hope all around. So that's sort of my recognition of my past and my present and my future. And I wanted to begin, and I neglected to say, I'm incredibly thankful to Michelle and John for having originated 52250 in the first place. 52250 was incredibly important to me, and I'm so thankful I was a part of it, and it made a huge difference. Matt Potter as well deserves thanks because the wonderful book which he produced out of it was spectacular for me, and I can't begin to express my thanks enough. So thank you. And that's enough of a preamble. And so here is my second piece in the series, and it is called Mirko's Mountain Yet Again. Mirko huffs as they climb the last ascent, and suddenly they're at the top, and he's breathing in the freezing air and hints of gladness, startled anew by the view from Rosutets Mountain. Vierka stomps her feet. First time here, not sure yet whether this prematurely gray man with the outline of a paunch is worth the effort. It is gorgeous, she says. No word of a lie there. He reaches out and wraps her in a bear hug. A flock of sheep grazes far below Belstinkle. A hawk soars. Father proposed to mother here, Mirko says. Years later, when I was scrambling for a new start, he and I climbed up, and then we lived together for a while. I buried him after about 2 years, but we cooked some mean stews together, swallowed all our hurts. They breathe in silence for a while. Mirko kneels. It's pretty quick, I know, but I think we're a good fit. I'll try to make you happy, I will. Will you? He's presenting a ring. His eyes lit up. She squints into the sun, opens her mouth. No sound comes. She brushes her hair back, rips off a hairband, sends it twirling towards the furs. Mirko zips the ring into a pocket, glowering. We can take more time if you want. If you're not certain. She bolts like a mountain goat, stumbles on a rock, slides, but does not slow down, does not look back. So just one more editorial comment here as I was thinking about it this afternoon. The first piece begins in hope, as I said, and the first piece begins with Mirko waits for his father to catch up, and Mirko and his father are on his way up the mountain. 11 years later, Mirko is there with his girlfriend. They're on their way down the mountain, and she scampers away, and it's a different world. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tina Barry. I'm in High Falls, New York. I want to thank Michelle and John for creating this project, creating the original project. At that time, I had just started writing, and I was so excited to be part of that, and I'm excited to be part of this. The first piece that I wrote during a summer when I was living in Woodstock, New York. And I used to go to a flea market, and there was all fascinating stuff there. So I wrote a little bit about what I saw at that flea market. And when I got the call for this project, I wanted to return to that flea market. And the first piece was really about love and a little bit about grief. And so is this new piece. It's called Dog Psychic. Lucy centers the sign Dog Psychic and Past Life Regressionist on her folding table and sits, content to sip tea and nod at the regulars. Beside her, she's erected a screen to shield a pet-sized love seat, made comfortable with embroidered pillows. Squinting between the constellation of vendors, she notices a woman with an old lab. The dog's heartsick, she thinks, observing its dropping head, the plodding, joyless walk. She isn't surprised when the woman, spotting Lucy, hurries to her table. Hannah's depressed, the woman says, nodding to the dog that rolls on its back, one paw covering its eyes. Nothing she's tried. St. John's wort, licorice root, even, she admits, an organic sirloin has alleviated the dog's sadness. Lucy kneels before the dog. Come, Hannah, she says, taking the dog's leash. As Hannah reclines, Lucy leans over, places her hand on its silken head. Lifetimes of longing pass through her stinging fingertips. Images begin to flow. There's Hannah, a puppy, her fur a glistening ink blot in the sun. A man had loved the dog, though briefly. She feels the heat of his hands as he strokes the pup's belly. There's not much Lucy can offer the dog, but a lie. He has not forgotten you, she says, remembering her own hair, untouched by gray, a blouse embroidered with violets, and the man who lifted it over her head and pulled her to his chest. Thank you.
Kia ora. My name's Rachel and I'm coming to you from Otatahi, Christchurch, Aotearoa, New Zealand. So yeah, similar to others, when I went back to look for my first piece for this anthology, it was the first flash fiction that I'd ever written, which ended up being longlisted in National Flash Fiction Day ages ago and ended up being my first ever public reading as well. So it was really nice going back to that early work. My new story that I'll be reading today kind of followed on from that, and that, yeah, it ended up having themes or connections to early sexual encounters or misunderstandings, and looking at connection and disconnection between people. Yeah, so I'll read that now. The kiss. We sit on the front seat. He stops the car outside my house, keeps it running. Sophia has told me the basics. Open your mouth a little, let him put his tongue in, don't do it first. Close your eyes, his face will look weird up that close. She and I practiced on damp pillows, our own reddened arms, once on each other, breathless at our bravery. I take off my seatbelt, wait, hear the click slide as he does the same. I know the tilted heads and slickly matched lips from the movies. I know my brother and his girlfriend, the snake thrust of his tongue into her mouth, the push of his groin. He reaches an arm out, turns the music up. The radio fills the car with noise. I can feel and not hear my heart escaping. At the movies, I did not eat popcorn in case a kernel stuck in my teeth. I drank water and not Coke in case the sugar coated my tongue. I chewed a piece of gum 20 times when I went to the toilet before we left. I look his way, and he is so close that I can see the pin dot white of a spot on his chin. I close my eyes. The next day I ring Sophia. I tell her it was warm and wet, that our teeth banged 5 times and his breath smelled of onions. I tell her that I think I am in love. Thank you.
Kia ora. I'm Nod Ghosh from Otatahi, Christchurch. My first piece, Coloured Hands, was written a long time ago, shortly before our family left the UK to move to New Zealand. Although on the surface it depicts the tension between two people, the underlying conflict mirrors the mixed feelings about any significant change in life. The second piece that I'm going to read, which is called Orange Flowers, shows the aftermath of the breakup between the same narrator and her husband and the mixed emotions that accompany all endings. It draws on concepts and items from the first story, including flowers, hands, tea, and a bucket. Orange Flowers. Someone sends orange flowers for my birthday. Gerberas, marigolds and zinnias. Wisps of crocosmia protrude from the yellow-red dome. Taking them from the delivery man's calloused hands, my thank you is effusive, as if the man himself has presented me with the bouquet. The card is decorated with orange blossoms too. Remembering you on your special day from T-Bear. I'd stopped using Ted's pet name once divorce loomed. He's never given me flowers before, so his gesture seems irrelevant now, nonsensical even. I don't have a large enough vase, so I place the bunch in a bucket. Making tea, I wipe emotion away with milk and splashes of sugar. Perhaps I should thank Ted, but it can wait. Later, I sculpt my response. Thanks. Nah, too stark, erase. Cheers for the gift. Sprightly, still not right. I wish things hadn't ended the way they did. Now that won't do. Thank you for the flowers. Too polite, I don't feel polite. Can flowers undo the damage that you did? No, don't show him I'm broken. Bastard. No, don't give him the satisfaction of a curse word. Orange is at odds with my melancholic mood. You should have said blue. Absolutely not. This is Eleanor's work. She'll have reminded him I like orange flowers. Ted doesn't remember details, not like I do. I saw a man with calloused hands today. He reminded me of you, to hint at his callous indifference. Doesn't seem right. Nothing is right. Because how can anything be right when everything is so wrong? Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Rasnick, originally from Outer Banks, North Carolina, and now live in Northeast Tennessee, near the North Carolina mountains. And 52250 was a great project, one of the most important I've been involved in. I've been writing ekphrastic poetry and flash fiction for about 25 years, focused on cinema, literature, music, that sort of thing, and art. And I stumbled upon the postcard method, which is my contribution to this wonderful anthology. Thanks to Michelle and John and Matt for putting out a great product. It's a beautiful book. Really proud to be a part of it. I was working on a poem relative to Rossellini's War Trilogy and stumbled upon a brief method that I called postcards. And so I wrote several, 2 or 3 for the 2010 version, and was still working in that vein in 2020. And so one piece I'm going to read this evening here, it's morning there, is focused on music. And 2020 was a devastating year worldwide. And an icon of mine, John Prine, contracted COVID-19 in this late winter. It was toward the end of March. It was, I guess, early spring. I think he was 72 or 73, and the body just can't fight as much at that age. And so I felt moved to write a piece. And then later, in April, a few weeks later, he died. And so my piece I'm reading now is reference to him. And one part in the title I need to explain: the Earl of Old Town was a club in Chicago for folk musicians that John Prine was a part of in the late 60s. And I'll just read it. Chicago, the Earl of Old Town, for John Prine, with hello if you say it. Sometimes the words don't come, they hide. Too true, too caring, too unwilling, as if to say, by not saying. There are holes with no bottom, skies that are nothing but cloud. Sometimes the hard truth is a wrinkle in my stomach, an ache where nothing is, a stare through the closed window. We can whisper, he is gone, she is gone, but that never tells the whole story, does it? Maybe we can do without doing, maybe so, or at least know the stars are listening, 1971. And then I wrote a postcard reply. From my table, the morning in hand with almost filled it. The polymer mystical floats to the cherry's trunk. An effortless beauty, a special moment of good on such dark days, then goes. April 2020. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Eric Kennedy Aho. Can everyone hear me? Grand. Yeah, so thanks to Michelle and John for making this anthology happen. I was never part of the original 52250 project, but being asked to participate was fantastic because it's always interesting to respond to your own stuff because we do have these preoccupations that we revisit anyway. It's good to have a sort of specific thing to respond to. It makes things really different. So the first piece that the piece that I responded to is from 2016, so a little later than some of them. The premise of that was that there are about as many species on Earth as there are people in Austria. So the idea was every person in Austria was assigned a species. And if that species went extinct, that person it was curtains for them. So it was like, everyone has to do their bit, otherwise there will be consequences. This piece, the animals have the upper hand in a very different sort of way. It's called soft power. The invention of practical brainwave to speech technology had a knock-on effect that no one seemed to have anticipated. Animals now could not only speak, but they proved to be vastly more entertaining than humans. The earliest interviews immediately showed this. We had underestimated their intelligence, of course, but also their wit and persuasiveness. All animals appeared to have hidden depths. An otter named Schulte could tell thousands of coruscating jokes. A clip of a lemur fact-checking and humiliating a respected journalist became the most viewed video in history. The human monopoly on expression had been broken, and as usually happens in such cases, the market was transformed. It wasn't just that animal media was novel and interesting. That drew people in, yes, but they stayed because of the punch of the storytelling, the giddy and deranged excesses of the humor. Animals became bona fide stars and important artists, and the legal and financial professions predictably evolved to manage their rights and assets. The longer the animal arts flourished, the greater the soft power of animals became. They were oracles, troubadours, bards, soothsayers, heartthrobs. They were known for what they gave to the world, not for what they took from it. School children, when polled, said they wanted to grow up to be animals. And people wondered if that soft power would stay soft. Humans knew what they had used power for, and no one was sure yet if it could be used for anything else. Thank you.
Kia ora. I'm David Eagleton. I'm beaming in from Otipoti, Dunedin, Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'd like to thank Michelle for inviting me to be part of this project. I have two pieces that are related. The first one was written about 35 years ago, and the second one was written last year. The relationship between them is that they're both about Auckland, the city in the north that is the largest city in New Zealand, largest Polynesian city in the world. And the first one I wrote when I was living in Auckland, and the second piece I wrote returning to Auckland. And so I guess it's about the contrast between the two places, between the the place that I knew back in the 1980s and the place that exists now. So this is called Big City Rush Hour. Cloud pops out, a bodybuilder posing. Heat grills each car on the grid. Bronze light slashes off the windows. A bus sways forward, concertina style. A finance house stacks up its cool vertical lines, calculator thin. This town stands as open as an airport lounge. Everyone looks like a new arrival. So that had an air of expectation to it. By contrast, I guess this second piece has an air of exasperation. It's called Autogeddon. Horn cadences cascade, storied car parks climb. On the spaghetti western motorway, thoroughbreds gallop, nags limp, and tall trucks wobble like prairie wagons. Nearing traffic cone country, highways clot to snail pace. The high-vis vest squad in earmuffs weed wax a berm, beeping to get a wriggle on, stuck in crawl space. A driver chews her bubblegum to boiling point. Bull bars bunt like antlers, paddle pops guard school crossings. Cat's eyes blink, skateboarders bumper hang, tire tread signs the dotted line. The tailback jams a slow-moving glacier, compounded of frozen glances and tiny fists, beating against the insides of windscreens. Past the bottleneck, traffic swarms as one, like wasps from a nest knocked out of a tree. Motorbike throttles open up on the scenic route. Mag wheels revolve quickly over slick tar seal, but pause delicately for the breath-testing cue. Out of the dark heart of night, cars transform with flashing grills and sleeved headlamps and aerodynamic stripes to samurai warriors, to the judder of kabuki theatre, to racer circuits between stoplights. Truckies ratchet up the ante and gun their big rigs. Possums are mashed into pizza topping. End of the road is Autogeddon's scrap heap, confiscated, crushed, melted for road signs. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great close to the readings. Really wonderful to hear everyone sharing. It's always amazing to hear the readings in the author's voices. I think viewers and listeners, when we go to live readings, that's one of the most pleasurable parts. We read everything on the page and we have our own experience of that. But when we hear somebody reading in their own words, we have their inflection, their accent, or the way they might emphasize a certain word or phrase. And I really love that. Just wonderfully diverse readings today. So thank you to everyone. I wanted to start, everybody can unmute now, because I think it'd be really wonderful for our listening audiences to hear us just talk a little bit about this process of being in dialogue with ourselves. But what I notice is that we're in dialogue with our characters and ourselves, and also the world. That comes through in so much of the writing, even fictional pieces. You know, Andrew was talking about going up the mountain and coming down the mountain. And there's something about living in this world and how our experience of writing has changed. And I guess I wanted to ask everybody in the room, I think it's so interesting to think about when you were writing, are you writing in response to yourself, to your characters, to the world? Also to language, because that comes through really clearly in this reading as well. Does anybody want to talk about that?
Someone's got to be first.
I don't mind the pauses. I always think someone will be. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I don't know if I'm responding to like a past version of myself or to, I don't know. For me, it's often just some new prompt sends me back to old things. Like, I wouldn't say that the pieces that I wrote are necessarily as connected as some other people's. They both, you could use like keywords and say they both are about animals, but like in some ways they're sort of fresh takes on kind of related things. I don't know.
Well, I liked what Sheila said about actually you're writing a new piece, but then sometimes we're writing it's the same old story. And of course, that's something that writers we all contemplate, sometimes maybe struggle with, but also really embrace, because that challenge of if these are the topics and the themes that we are engaged with personally and also as writers, how does our representation of them or the way we dive into those topics, how does that change when actually we're always unpacking some of the same topics? I thought that was really interesting that you said that, Sheila. And I love hearing somebody admit honestly, yeah, we're always just trying to work on the same stuff.
Yeah, I think so. For me, my work is always a response to the world. Like I'm a very responsive person, I think. And I sometimes think I don't feel I would exist at all as a writer or perhaps even as a person if it wasn't for my responsiveness that has completely shaped who I am as a person and as a writer. And it is always the same, for me, it's always the same topics. The external circumstances may change subtly or dramatically, but the essential ingredients remain the same. The essential basis is the same for me as a writer. There is only one story really for me.
I agree totally. I certainly think that I have continued to have the same preoccupations always. And back when I was a part of 52250, I wrote perhaps 40-45 pieces about this one character, and at that time back then I thought, well, I would write a whole pile more and then perhaps put them together in a book, and it so happens that didn't happen, but there have been a great many other stories with other characters, but I would say that the preoccupations remain the same, and the characters might have different names, and even the situations might be very different, but in a sense I'm always wrestling with the same issues, and in a sense you could argue that I'm always writing the same story. And perhaps, Michelle, you would allow me a slight commercial here. I have just published finally my first book earlier this year, and it's called Saying Goodbye. So it is not about Mirko, who is 52250, but it does take place in Bratislava, Slovakia, and was published by Gloria Mindock of Červená barva Press, but the book is available on Amazon. So if anybody feels inspired to buy Saying Goodbye from Amazon, that would be absolutely wonderful. As I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, sales of books from small presses are just about non-existent. Perhaps sold as many as 50 copies, and perhaps not. So anyway, here is a small book that I've just published, and here it is for your perhaps enjoyment. So thank you.
That's actually great to hear, Andrew. Thank you for sharing. And I think for all of us, we all work probably with different kinds of presses, small presses, and then some larger presses. And I mean, the experience of getting your work out there is always the same. It's a challenge. It's a little bit frightening, and then it's thrilling also. So Andrew, that's wonderful. Congratulations on the book. That's great. But I am waiting to hear when those Mirko stories might actually appear as a book. So we'll see.
Perhaps. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm really wondering, I was noticing when I was listening to everyone read that a lot of times the stories were in direct response in terms of the plot and the characters. You know, I'm thinking of Tina and Rachel and Nod, and yeah, there's some that are just really wonderful the way we're back in that world with those characters. So I was wondering, was it a new thing to go back and revisit your characters again? And did you see them in a new light? What was that experience like? I'd love to hear somebody talk about that. Not that I'm putting you three on the spot, anyone at all.
I suppose it's kind of like a bit of a mental illness situation that we have all these imaginary characters running around in our heads and have to be very careful not to talk to ordinary people about, oh, my character did this, my character did that, because they become very real to us. And so there's a certain comfort in going back to visit existing characters and continue their story however many years on, because they start to feel like they actually exist, that they have decisions that they can make themselves. Or perhaps that is a sign of my mind not working as it should be doing. I don't know. What does anybody else think? Do they seem real to you, the old characters?
I guess mine was a little bit more auto-fiction. So yes, it was real to me.
Yeah.
But it was very therapeutic in a strange way, because of the strange order of events, that I got this photograph from this friend in Australia. And of course, because I had been about 6 years old in this pepper tree, I didn't know. I just used to see these mysterious cocoons, and I had no idea what they were really. And it set me on this journey, to learn more about them. And the more I learned, the more exciting they were. But also it was that recognition, you know, of something from your early childhood that was quite beautiful and mysterious. And then and it really moved me, this photograph. So it gave me somewhere and something, a place to put it. So I was very grateful for that, really. And yeah, I realized there was a story behind it, I guess. I don't know if that answers your question, Nog, but.
Well, it's actually really interesting. And I love the way a lot of what we heard today, I felt myself really immersed in the story that I was hearing. And I love listening to stories. And the other thing I noticed while I was listening, and again, anyone else who has questions, I'm glad that Nod asked questions too. Feel free to jump in. But I was also noticing, and it's worth saying for viewers who might not know everyone in the room, I think almost everyone who's in this reading moves a little bit between story and poetry and different narrative forms. We have a lot of poets in the book as well. And I really like to think that actually everyone in this book and a lot of other writers that I work with, I think we like to feel a bit unbound. We don't want to be put into one genre or another. And I really hear that with this as well. And in particular, whether it felt more like a story or it felt like a reflection that was more perhaps prose poetry or poetry, that attention to language really struck me. And I do think earlier on and with the more recent pieces that we heard today, there's a real focus around language and rhythm and sound. And I'm just wondering if some of you would like to talk about that. I mean, anyone who can talk about it, but some of the poets in the room as well. It'd be interesting to hear how story and sound or place and sound connect for you as you were writing these pieces.
Well, for me, it's about the narrative of the self. So I tend to start with a philosophical viewpoint of what is the self, and then the stories that I tell are related to multiple selves or a sense of what the self is experiencing. And so the two pieces I have here, they, as I said before, they're related. And on a formal level, you can talk about them as prose poems in a way. But behind that, the impulse is really to tell a story, which is based on my experience of these places and try and condense it into the flash format, into the short story format, as a kind of a fragment which works in its own right. And so how to do that is really the problem that I set myself for this particular project. And so there are all these different elements which go into making up the final piece of work, which don't necessarily appear in the work, but they're actually what I use as my working technique to get to the finished product.
As someone who often comes at Flash from a sort of poet's perspective, I'll say that to me, getting tone right involves texture, and that really, for me, I can do through word choice and sound. And like, so yeah, it's sort of a big part of the overall effect, I think, because I'm not blessed with the sort of plot gift, I don't think. Wish I were working on it, but so you have to make up for that somehow to make things interesting. So, and that's possibly one reason why the people who are sort of poetry writers and Flash writers don't necessarily also write novels, I'd say. It's just like there's that extra, but maybe there are people who do all three here who could address this compositional thorny bit.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I feel like I write poetry and I write Flash, and I come at them both from the same kind of angle, which is essentially, I don't really have a notion of character. I'm not creative in that sense. I'm more excavative. And I think that's kind of one of the differences maybe between that kind of writing and novelistic writing. I don't really create worlds. I'm always talking about myself, essentially, basically, and it's all about me, really. And I am all of those other people in my work. And I think sound for me is extremely important, to the point where I have to school myself out of an excessive alliteration for a start. You know, it's really important to me how it sounds in my head and how it sounds spoken, and also how it actually sort of looks on the page, because that also has a kind of rhythm and a shape to it. So I think all of those kind of senses come into play when you're writing such intense pieces, intense works. And I think the novel is more roomy and more baggy. It's, you know, it's a roomier kind of thing, and a much more creative form in a way. But I don't have that type of creativity.
I actually love hearing you both talk about texture and sound. And it occurs to me, you know, I mean, we didn't really plan this conversation, but I like the way these things meander around. It occurs to me, looking at all of you, that at least three of you, and maybe more, are also musicians. Sheila and Sam and David does a lot with music as well. There might be other musicians in the room. I think that seems so important. There's a musicality to writing words, isn't there? Yeah, Sam, I know that you do a lot with music. You want to talk about that a little bit, the relationship between music and writing poetry?
Well, yeah, music connects directly with my writing. And what I noticed from 2010 and 2020, there was no change whatsoever in my voice, because probably a decade earlier, I found my, what I call poetic voice. And it's really not one voice, it's many voices. And I don't have to worry about characters, even when I'm writing Flash. And I've been writing more Flash the last few years, because I write mostly ekphrastic work. So the focus takes care of the who and the what and the when and where, that kind of thing. But there is a rhythm that I go with, and I've taken a number of poems and been able to write music for them because of that tone and rhythm and voice, which for me is most important.
Yeah, that's really nice. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I was just to say, I just revisiting when the invitation arrived, and I was excited and terrified at the same time, because when I went back, it was the first piece of Flash that I'd written, and I was worried about making them relate, having some relationship between the two pieces. And language was one of the ways I did that, by using that sort of adult, very adult language for a child's view, but also things like the Latin about the pepper tree and bringing that into the case moth one. I just, it was a challenge to me initially, and I did play around with voice for a while with that. I felt I wanted them to be companion pieces for some reason, maybe because of the tree. I don't know, but
Yeah, that's it's really neat. I think it's so important. Everyone here seems to be so aware of voice, and how can you not be? And we had such a really interesting array of voices. We're coming to the end, but actually I'm sort of thinking of who hasn't been able to illuminate a little bit further. And actually, speaking of voice, I'm thinking of Rachel, not to put you on the spot, but really goes back and captures that youthful voice. And I'm wondering, how, if you want to talk about that, how you went back into that space. Your introduction told us a little bit about it, but I loved that. And it had some really beautiful phrasings which fit so authentically. Often we think about, if we're creating character, you got to get that voice right. So that was
great
really
detail, the popcorn and things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Rachel.
It happened quite easily, actually. I think some of those moments, and this was my moment, but some of those kind of preoccupations as a teenage girl, kind of those emotions stick with you. And I hadn't actually intended this as a carry-on character from my previous one, but now that you mention it, Michelle, I'm like, oh yeah, they totally could have been, the same person. And I wrote this during your course, actually, your second, when you were doing the 52 250 in New Zealand. And as part of that, you were challenging us to write in like different ways and find voices. So yeah, that was where this came from. And also playing with tense within it as well. So it's a mixture of present and past tense. But yeah, I find it's fun to go back to write those younger voices. And I have a teenage daughter, which helps as well.
Right. In conversation with yourself and the teenagers around you.
Exactly.
Well, I want to give everyone the opportunity, if anyone else wants to ask a question or say something. Does anyone else want to add some final words?
Something that was mentioned earlier about people that write novels. Has anybody read Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson? She was one of the inaugural winners of the Bach Novella in Flash Award. And if you haven't, I would recommend it, because she does draw in some of the concision and poetic use of language in her novel chapters. And so even though probably there isn't a great mix between the styles that people write, in this example where somebody does, you can see where it's coming from in terms of her flashlight way of thinking.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation, Nod. And you're right. There are people who sort of venture into the longer form from the shorter form. So we'll watch for that from everyone. We'll wait for the great New Zealand novel, Eric. And actually, David, do you have a poem that's about that, the great New Zealand novel?
Yeah, I do somewhere or other. But I mean, the concept of the great New Zealand novel, you can, it's an umbrella term. So many novels have been produced that could qualify in different ways. And it's really about different responses by very subjective. The great New Zealand novel, it's a myth. It's a mirage. It's an illusion. There's no such thing. Each novel is true unto itself. If it's a great novel, it will show up in the reading of it. So it was a kind of a game I was playing on that particular poem. Yes.
I remember that. And it's so funny. When I said that, it suddenly clicked because I've heard you read that poem. And that's probably maybe even where I probably stole it from you. But anyway, yes, we'll look forward to seeing what all of you write next. I want to say a big thank you to each of you for coming and spending this hour together. It's really neat to see you all together. I also want to thank my co-editor, John Wentworth Chapin. A little behind the scenes story, John and I grew up together and we hadn't seen each other in decades, and we reconnected online as adults somewhere just before 2010, around 2008. Found each other again and then ended up in this writing project, and we've been sort of writing together ever since. So that's actually a bit of a writer's love story between me and John.
Like a flash.
Childhood friend. He's really wonderful, and I'm sorry he wasn't with us today. Also, an enormous thank you to Matt Potter, who produced this beautiful book. And Matt was also in the original project, wrote pieces back in 2010. And then when John and I were thinking about putting together the anthology, we could think of no better person, because Matt was sort of part of that big extended family that was that year of writing. So thank you to Matt Potter. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to listeners and to also people who buy small press books. We'll go back to what Andrew reminded us of. That's also really nice. And congratulations to everyone. Thanks so much. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the Festival of Flash. We have more sessions coming. Next is a youth reading. And these youth readings are just tremendous. It's so wonderful to hear these young voices. It's an international set of readers from the National Flash Fiction Day competition this year, which is international in the youth category. And after that, we have a reading and a discussion from a new anthology called A Kind of Shelter. And Eric Kennedy is our host for that. So thanks to everyone. Enjoy your days and see you soon.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.